Hi, Jill.
Hello, nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Well,
Can we pause the recording?
of course.
I'm going to be respectful of everyone. And we're recording in progress. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Sorry, I'm just navigating between two screens here. Hello and good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for SHIP's workshop on the Data for Change Capacity Building Learning Series. Today, we're going to be learning about the equity use of data, and we appreciate you being here with us today. As we do with all of our presentations, we like to start with a land acknowledgement in supporting navigating and guiding us to a collective impact. Land acknowledgements are a commitment from the heart, and we stand on Turtle Island, which is home to Indigenous peoples that have embraced Mother Earth in cultivating teachings and encompasses all of the lands of what is now known as North America. We gather today as settlers on this land and from what's many parts of now called Ontario and give respect to its first inhabitants. We'd like to begin by acknowledging the land on which services and housing in the province operates, which is part of the treaty lands and territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit. In particular, we acknowledge the territory of the Anishinaabeg, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, Neutral, and Ojibwe Chippewa peoples, the land that is home to the Métis, and most recently the territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation, who are direct descendants of the Mississaugas of the Credit. We acknowledge that Dufferin County resides within the traditional territory and ancestral lands of the Tianan, Tati, and Atawataron. We also recognize that Waterloo Region is situated on the treaty territory belonging to Six Nations of the Grand River. This territory is within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. SHIP operates on lands covered by Treaties 4, 13, 18, and 19, and we acknowledge and commemorate that our privilege to live, play, and work on Turtle Island today and in future is a direct result of historical and present hurt, exclusion, and assimilation of Indigenous peoples. Turtle Island means connections deeply rooted in earth and spirit, and how we must be mindful and actively participate in our own and in each other and the land's growth. Action takes investment, care, and intention. And Shireen and our intention today is to support the continued learning of the Data for Change Capacity Building Learning Series by leaning into equity use of data practices. As settlers, we recognize and acknowledge our positionality and privilege in which we will honor and utilize in supporting a foundation rooted in a commitment of developing and embracing strong connections with you all in support of Indigenous communities. Aligning with cultural connection is the key in supporting the history journey of trauma. And we acknowledge that colonial data practices have led to misidentification, misclassification, and erasure of Indigenous peoples. We have the opportunity to make and be the change by leaning into equity data practices in collaboration. Wade Davis notes that change itself does not destroy a culture. All societies are constantly evolving. Indeed, a culture survives when it has enough confidence in its past and enough say in its future to maintain its spirit and essence through all the changes it will inevitably undergo. I will close through honoring that our strength is interwoven in our ability to guide each other through the waters of change and in the unwavering support we will offer to one another as we all navigate and fight for social justice and health equity within our communities, recognizing that data equity practice is vital to this commitment. We must never forget, nous jamais oublier, thank you, merci, and miigwech. And I'm going to pass it over to Cosel from Find Help 211 Toronto to speak more about our project objective and the Data for Change project model.
Thank you so much, Nicole. And thank you so much for just opening us up with such a lovely planned acknowledgement as we're mindful in this work as to why we're here and what anchors our work. So thank you. Again, for folks who are meeting me for the first time, or if you're coming back to us for many times, welcome back. And this is one of the really exciting launches of our last round of series of this capacity building learning series. And I always start these sessions with just a bit of an anchoring to why we're here and the larger objective of this project and data for change. It's starting off as with the three main objectives is to begin to have the sector collect and think about collecting social identity data in your agency. This capacity building series is not meant for you to do it in any particular way, but just to begin to think about doing it and how you would do it in your agency. And if you are doing it already, that's really, really great. Using it, and the larger objective is for us as a community social services to begin to use the data to advance better outcomes for many of our equity deserving communities that we serve in the communities, regions, and spaces that we provide services. And ultimately, we're hoping by sharing our tools, our resources, that we begin to socialize the methodologies in collecting social identities data and the tools used across organizations, across our tools, and the showcasing that we've been able to provide over the course of our learning series. Next slide, please. And this has really been the model that we've been executing over the year. And as we get into the third stage, just wanting to highlight the partners that have been part of this work, showcasing our capacity building partnership and what you've been seeing being presented month over month. So CASA has been leading our community of practice and really bringing the sector together to help dive into some of the topics and dive into some of the questions that many of you have had over the course of our time together. SHIP, like today, will be sharing and showcasing the work as an agency that has been working and collecting data for equity and data for change over the course of their time and growth as an organization, sharing their challenges, their learnings, and tools and resources as they've been coming along on this project. Logical Outcomes has also been a partner with us who's been sharing their knowledge, expertise, and areas around showcasing tools, resources, and supporting the data collection in our community social services space. And of course, Find Help 211, the partner that has been sharing this in a platform and knowledge mobilization hub, especially on the online platform, and housing many of the learnings, facilitating many of the learnings here, and being able to record and house many of those spaces there. Next slide, please. So if you've been on this journey with us, we've been going through this journey of really intentional stage planning of how one at any agency would be doing this work from an evaluation / data collection perspective. And so we've been staging our learnings in a very natural stage, as you can see there. We've been starting with plan and build, and each organization and partner has been able to showcase their work as relates to each stage. And we're really excited to be in this fourth stage, the sharing news. How, after all of the stages that we've been through and showcasing the capacity building work, we're at the stage where once the data is collected, how do we share it back out to the community? How do we use this for that system advocacy piece? And what are the larger pictures and answers that we're trying to use the data to inform? So I'm really excited to just zone into that stage 4, where this and the use of data was presented to here today by SHIP. November data analysis framework, and again, tying it to the larger picture, the larger discussion organizations need to think about in the use of data, sharing it from Logical Outcome. And then finally, we're going to wrap up in December with the community of practice gathering. And so we'll figure out what the gathering will look like and have more details to share in November, but we just wanted to put it out there that, yeah, we're really excited to be closing out and to be sharing this final stage with you all, as it's really as equally as important as all of the other stages that we've been presenting on. And as always, we know that this work is, if you've missed one, and we know everyone's schedule is really busy, you can always go for the dataforchange.ca. You can see the other video recordings of the session, tools that have been shared, and systems that have been just highlighted for you up in the website. And so feel free to do that as well. If you're interested in any of the upcoming sessions, you can also register on that capacity building tab. Data for Change, and the dates and registration links are there for you, or if you want to share it up to any of your partners or networks. Oh, and is there a stage just on the mindfulness, or do you guys do that? Yep, looks like you. I pass it over. Okay, I see head nods. You would think at the fourth stage, Gasal will get this right, but clearly not. So I'm more than happy to present that to you both, to you all, Nicole and Shireen, who will take us much more smoothly, hopefully, than I did into the day and really begin us out in this the last stage of our Data for Change. And thank you again for all of you who are joining us this afternoon. Enjoy.
Thanks so much, Cosel. It is a bittersweet day as it's our last presentation in facilitating the Data for Change project. And so for those who have not met me, my name is Nicola Bruscato, and I go by pronouns she, her. And I'm the manager of Central Intake and Access at Services and Housing in the province, or we're also known as SHIP. I am also a registered social worker with the Ontario College of Social Workers and Social Service Workers and have been with the organization for 17 years in various capacities. However, the passion for data for change and data equity has followed me throughout my career, and I want to pass it over to my dear colleague and friend Shireen to introduce herself.
Thank you, Nicole. Hello, everyone. My name is Shireen Ramprasad. I also go by pronouns she, her. I am the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Manager at SHIP. I have been with the organization for a little over 19 years in various different capacities across the organization. And our passion for data equity began many years ago when we started this work and when I started in a frontline capacity, working with clients and working with community. So it has driven us to where we are, and we're here to share with you all our experiences, our challenges, and how we've been able to ensure that we build a culture at our organization that relies on data equity. So thank you, and I'll pass it back to Nicole.
Thanks, Shireen. As I've said many times, truly grateful and privileged of knowing you and getting to work alongside you every day. Our guiding principles for learning today, which will provide us with a common understanding of how learning today can benefit us all and the collective impact on building impact as well through data equity, is that we're going to hold space for one another to learn and grow, as this may be some new concepts for folks, and we want to encourage that learning. Embracing and acknowledging our own and each other's vulnerability, being encouraged to practice what is learned. We'll get into it, what we put into it, agree to disagree, and also being present. We also want to hold space to guide our presentation today after a great recommendation from an attendee from our first workshop in April, recognizing that some of the content throughout our presentation and throughout this learning series can be difficult to hear and truly impactful, as it may be different from our own practices or hearing about the inequities that people are experiencing that further perpetuates health inequities and social injustice. We want to honor self-care and well-being and appreciating that we are all doing hard work while also recognizing the need to be kind to ourselves as we learn. And as we move through the workshops, we're going to pace ourselves. There's no rush, as Cosel said, that it will be recorded and uploaded to the dataforchange.ca website, so you're able to reflect back if you need to, as well as the slide deck is there in any tools as well. Stepping away when needed, and breaks are encouraged to give yourself the time and space to learn. Practicing self-care, whatever that may look for you. This work is really hard and challenging sometimes. However, it's about the impact and the change that we can make in the community. And knowing that we're not alone and that we're in this together does help to support the navigation of the work that we're doing. And like I said, everything is recorded, so you can pause and return later, catch up on what you missed, and engage when you're ready as well. So our objectives today are how to interpret equity data, how usage of data makes the impact, and bringing it all together by reviewing the tools that we provided throughout the Data for Change series so that we can see all in all how to support the next steps. So who is SHIP? We wanted to reintroduce ourselves in case there's anyone here today that has not been in attendance in the other workshops we've facilitated since April. Services and Housing in the Province, or also known as SHIP, is a nonprofit accredited exemplary standing through Accreditation Canada housing and service provider for over 30 years, serving the regions of West Toronto, Peel, Dufferin, and most recently Waterloo. Our mission is that we work to support those with mental health and addiction challenges to create to increase their quality of life and live to their full potential through safe, affordable, community-based housing and services. Our vision is that of quality housing, services, and lives. And as we all love our acronyms in this field, we are guided by our values of CHIRP, C for compassion, H for hope, I for inclusion, R for respect, and P for professionalism. We are also highlighted as the best nonprofit employer for DEI, or Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, by Charity Village in 2023 and the Canadian Nonprofit Employer of Choice in 2024. SHIP has an approach and framework that we have developed over the past few years regarding equity, diversity, and inclusion, or EDI. And it's really about moving away from performative allyship and aligning to meaningful action. So, really looking at the impact. We have demonstrated this through integrating EDI into our culture, our values, and setting goals and a commitment to acting on SHIP's EDI action plan that articulates and measures 29 activities for deep, meaningful change in the areas of our people, having our workforce be broadly reflective of the community we serve, our community having our workforce be inclusive for all, and our systems identifying and addressing barriers within organizational systems and processes. We hope that this will be evident in our presentation that we're sharing with you today. So why is SHIP here today with you? We recognize that we may not represent all organizations and/or sectors joining us today. However, we believe that health equity and social justice are translatable. Coming together and learning supports a united stance on how we can move forward the collective impact in data for change. Lastly, we recognize that we're not experts. However, we're here to share our experience in how we are building impact within our organization and community, as well as learn from you. So we have we have a couple of mentees. So I'm just going to plug it into the chat here in case folks can't get the QR code, and I'm just going to see if it's going to load for us. So it's menti.com if you're using the internet browser, and the code is 37468797. So we'll just give a couple of seconds here for folks to join in. So we like to have our presentation as interactive as possible. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to use the chat function throughout the presentation. And we will answer throughout or also leave space at the end as well. And I'm hoping my message went into the main chat there. Okay. Awesome. So for the first poll question, what do you think equity use, what do you think equity use of data means? So it is an open text, so you're able to write in there. So we have open access to data. Using data in a way that is equitable to those who the data is about, considering data with an equity lens. Yep. Responsible use of data to build awareness around and help to address issues of inequity, absolutely. Making sure data is available in formats that are accessible. Really great point. Awesome, thank you. our next poll is, do you think your organization, oh, sorry, I don't know why I jumped back. Do you think your organization interprets data from an equity lens? And there's yes, no, or unsure. So we have one person saying yes, a couple that are unsure. So hopefully after today's presentation, I'll give you a little bit more insight to see if your organization is interpreting data from an equity lens, and some tools that you're able to utilize and bring back to look at it as an organization within your strategic plan and your key performance indicators as well. Awesome, thank you. And our next poll, and I think this is the final one, what do you think are some systemic implicit biases about equity use of data? And it's an open text as well. And it's okay if folks are unsure about this question, as Shireen's going to provide a really great in-depth learning in a couple of slides about this. But we just wanted to see where we're starting off to gear the presentation as well, if folks are aware or if they're not. That it's only used to advance a certain protected group and not inclusively. Absolutely. Data is clear, numbers don't lie. Just seeing if there's any other responses coming in. Western perspectives or guidelines for data interpretation. Everyone has access to this platform. It's not that difficult to find. People will understand what this means. Absolutely. So really taking a overall approach to things and not really coming down to the accessibility or the minute things that we may take for granted or are privileged not to think about when we're looking at supporting the community. Thank you. So now we have two videos that we want to share. And this video here is on how data helps us with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's created by MSD UK, which is a patient engagement group. And their purpose is to use power of leading edge science to save and improve lives around the world. And they also empower colleagues to engage with patients in a meaningful way. So let's watch together, and I'm hoping the video's working. Shireen, if you can just give me a thumbs up if
By
the
having data, you are able
sound.
to identify where the
Perfect.
gaps are.
This submission to the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index is very much the beginning of us starting to explore where we move with data.
Not only will we have a benchmark against our industry peers, it also means that as a company, we know where our data gaps are.
Without data, it's hard to be able to pinpoint where you want to be focusing your areas.
We want to use the data to make sure that the work that we've done in that time is going to benefit the people at MSD and in the external community.
Data to us, especially in the accessibility audit, was paramount, was key.
By having data, you are able to identify where the gaps are.
Sorry, my computer was not wanting to go to the next slide. So there's some really key points there. So Wally notes that by having data, you'll be able to identify where the gaps are. Claire notes that data helps us with equity, diversity, and inclusion, as it will not only have a benchmark against with their industry and peers, but as a company, they'll know where their data gaps are, which is really important. Dean notes that without data, it's hard to be able to pinpoint the focus of key areas. And Caroline notes that being intentional about data being collected and how they will use it to make a difference in the community and businesses that they are doing their work. So really providing that mission and vision of why the collection of data is important. Our next video here was created by the Institute for Healthcare Improvement on Would You Rather Not Know? On the importance of stratifying health equity, and they're also known as IHI. They're leading globally recognized for nonprofit healthcare improvement organization that have been applying evidence-based quality improvement methods to meet current and future healthcare challenges for more than 30 years. IHI provides millions of people in healthcare with methods, tools, and resources to make better, safer, and more equitable, and it convenes experts to enable knowledge sharing and peer learning, and advises health systems and hospitals of all sizes in improving their systems and outcomes at scale. So let's take a look at this video.
I would say, would you rather not know? You know, tell me you would rather not know what challenges you have than say that pulling the data is going to be so difficult. And then there's validity to how challenging the data can be. And I'm never going to debate that. So I would always encourage leaders to ask yourself, how do you want to eat the elephant? Right? You're not going to change everything at once. So first start with, are you actually collecting real data, race, ethnicity, and language? Like, just start there. And how can you make sure that every time a patient presents, you're getting comprehensive, real data on them? Just start with that baseline. And after you cross a 70% threshold of accurate, real data, and by accurate, I mean, if a patient presents and you're asking them like, hey, thanks for coming to us today. We really want to make sure we're providing you with the best care possible. And a part of that is sharing how you identify and your race and culture and ethnicity with us. And if the person says, well, I'm from Detroit, right? Training, it means like, hey, probing and pushing further because you want to get the best information from them and you're comfortable and you're sharing the why. So that's one of the reasons why data is going to be important. And after you cross that threshold with collecting accurate real data, then it's like, okay, so what quality metric do we want to start with to make sure that we are actually talking the talk and walking the walk, and everyone is getting great outcomes? Not an aggregate score, but really saying that, sure, there's an aggregate score, but stratify and make sure that everyone is actually getting the best care possible.
So it's such a powerful message that Tucson really reminded us on holding ourselves in alignment of equity data by asking the question, would we rather not know? There is validity, like was mentioned, in the challenge of collecting and using data and holding space is really key for this. However, it also comes back to what is our purpose for the collection and use of data, and is it being used to support and make meaningful impact within our community? Shireen has spoken about this at our previous presentations, and that it's vital for us to share the why on the collection and usage of data within the community so that they are informed, which in turn supports a wholesome picture of who we are supporting and where we need to leverage partnership and collaboration to support the community. It also ties back to how data needs to be embedded at every level of service and through strategic plans and key performance indicators to help drive the mission of the organization, and that staff are also well informed on this so that they understand and align with data equity. So those two videos are a really great starting point for today's learning session and seeing how other areas of the world are using and aligning with data equity or equity data. Through the Data for Change series, you've learned organizational readiness, building impact, trauma-informed practice, and today we're going to lean into the equity use of data. Our next important task is how to look at how we're going to shift the narrative on data reporting. Interpreting equity data through a social justice and equity lens goes beyond collecting and inputting demographic information into our client records. It requires an intentional and intersectional systemic approach to identify and address barriers, focusing on experiences of those we serve and the impact, rather than solely focusing on representation. This leads us to the important question of why. When we are providing equity data, it is important to note that the data is not just about numbers. We should be highlighting health disparities and social injustice when showcasing the data to support telling the story and the need for action. Equity is not about numbers, it is about people. So here's another video from MSD UK Patient Engagement Group on using data in the EDI journey.
Data delivers.
And it gives us the insights we need.
That's true for developing medicines and vaccines.
And it's true for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Data guides our efforts to create a culture where all of us can feel and do our best, whoever we are.
Data reveals the issues that need our attention, like with our accessibility audit.
Data identifies potential solutions, like the back-to-work coaching we have offered to parents returning from leave.
Data measures the impact of initiatives, like our bespoke leadership program, to support our ethnically diverse colleagues to progress their careers.
Data connects us to partners who can give an unbiased, external perspective on our work, like Stonewall, who are evaluating our progress on LGBTQ+ inclusion.
We're using data and the insight that data gives us to continually create a better workplace.
A place where we all belong.
Where together we can realise our full potential.
To improve the lives of patients and the people who love and care for them.
Data
So as we heard in the video, data delivers and gives us the insights we need for true practice of equity, diversity, and inclusion. And it helps create a culture where everyone can support and feel and do their best whoever they are. As much as we speak about a data equity culture for service delivery and who we serve, this needs to be the same for staff who are doing the great work. So really highlighting the importance of psychological health and safety and having staff be a part of the journey. Data helps us to provide with starting points of where we need to focus and help us measure initiatives, and it can also provide us with potential solutions. These are some of the notes from the video. It can also be used to create partnership and collaboration, which we'll speak to in a couple of slides on how SHIP has supported in enhancing our service delivery through this lens. And data equity needs to be a continued practice as it closely is correlated with belonging for both clients and staff. So how does telling the story make an impact? For example, the data equity team at SHIP recognized that the alignment rate for veteran status was quite significant and needed to determine, are we not making the offer to know if someone is a veteran, or is there another piece to the story? We partnered with a local Legion and regional police service to train staff on how to support veterans, as we learned that many people who served do not refer to themselves as veterans, which is evident in our alignment rate. We trained staff on making the offer and asking the question that is inclusive in support of someone's identity. This partnership also led to a unique service pathway where staff can now refer those who have served in the military to a regional police service without criminal justice involvement or entry into their database if they're only accessing the veteran support. And they are able to then support them with Veterans Affairs Canada and get them set up with all of those supports that are under that umbrella. As SHIP staff cannot make a direct referral to Veterans Affairs Canada as we're civilians. This provides the client with more access and opportunity. So really looking at how to leverage what's in the community so that staff have the tools to know about the resources and then in turn make those appropriate referrals and service pathways for clients. Another example of how equity data can help us tell a story and create partnership is that SHIP is an identified organization under the French Languages Services Act of Ontario. We have a robust active offer training for new and existing employees, which includes how to support the Francophone and French-speaking communities in accessing services at our organization. It also includes how we ask the question on preferred language of service delivery at time of application and throughout the client service. A local organization was told about our active offer for French training within SHIP and is working with Ontario Health to implement this for Punjabi within the region of Peel, as through an equity lens, it's been identified as a much needed resource. So although it's not the same language, we're still able to utilize some of the practices in our training on how to best support that active offer of getting to know someone's identity and then being able to support them in their preferred language. And so I'm going to pass it over to Cherie now to talk about how we use the data equity story to support staff, clients, and their families through an EDI lens. And then we're going to be going into how usage of data can make the impact.
Thank you, Nicole. Nicole mentioned that, as much as we were talking in this series about collecting sociodemographic data about clients or people that we serve, that data can also tell us about what we need to do within our staff populace as well. And so one of the things that we were able to do at SHIP, given that we have this robust amount of client information about who we need to represent in our organization, we were able to then look at what within our staff populace, who do we need to provide supports for? So we developed employee resource groups. The focus of our ERGs is on elevating the voices of employees from groups that are underrepresented or historically marginalized. Membership is not limited to those staff from these groups, but they're also inclusive of allies who want to help elevate these voices. At SHIP, we have a number of ERGs, which we have developed over the years and taken suggestions from staff themselves who have wanted to be involved and are very passionate about some of these ERGs. So at SHIP, we have our Proud ERG for our 2S LGBTQIA+ community. We have an allyship at SHIP ERG, our BIPOC caucus for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We have ERG Abilities, which mainly deals with accessibility in the organization for both clients and staff within the organization. Live Well, Work Well. This is an ERG that has done amazing things within this organization when it comes to work-life balance, employee wellness, overall wellness, and being able to balance out your work as well as the things that you might need as far as benefits and things like that. And then we have our Enviro ERG, which we are very, very proud of. Our Enviro ERG has been able to guide the organization to become better environmental stewards. And working alongside our Truth and Reconciliation Ambassadors group, Enviro and Truth and Reconciliation have really been able to work together to develop practices which are also based in the Indigenous principles around land and land stewardship as well. So we're very proud of these ERGs because it shows us that data equity is really important across the whole organization, not just when it comes to client service development, but when you take care of your employees, when you take care of the staff who are taking care of the clients, we see better outcomes overall. So that's just one way in which your data and taking a data equity approach can really have a significant impact, not just in one area, but in many different areas of your organization. Another area in which our data is very valuable, and the fact that we do collect information about clients and their families, is through our client and family engagement. We have a client and family engagement framework that was developed with clients and family members. We also have a client and family Program Advisory Committee that we've had in the organization for several years. Our goal is to actively work with clients and their families to promote a collaborative approach to services. The philosophy is people-centered care. Our approach is client and family engagement, and our outcome is to have better client experiences. Committees that clients and families are members on at SHIP are, like I said, the Client and Family Program Advisory, as well as our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee has had client membership over the past few years, and family membership as well. So I'm going to walk us through a couple of different things when it comes to bias. When we're looking at impact and we're looking at collecting and using this type of information, identity and sociodemographic data, an important factor when we're analyzing this data is understanding our own bias and understanding how bias also then impacts how we look at our data. And I'm sure a lot of you have probably done some sort of workshop or had some sort of training or development around bias. So this might be a refresher for many around explicit or conscious bias, which occurs when when a person is very clear about their feelings and attitudes, and related behaviors are conducted with intent. Implicit or unconscious bias operates outside of the person's awareness and can be in direct contradiction to our espoused beliefs and values. We all carry bias, and I know you've probably heard that before. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. We don't have to have that negative feeling around bias. Bias can actually be very helpful for us as long as we go through a process to check our biases and understand them and understand the impact that our biases have in our decision making. So that's what we're going to try and do a little bit of today. And we're going to try and look at some tools that we have been able to use to incorporate that understanding of our bias into the work that we do and into our analysis and use of data that we collect at SHIP. So a big part of this work that we're doing at our organization is around reducing systemic bias. Understanding first that systemic bias exists. According to Oxford, and so I'm giving you the definition as a starting point. Systemic bias is a tendency for the procedures and practices of particular institutions to operate in ways which result in certain social groups being advantaged or favored and others being disadvantaged or devalued. This need not be the result of any conscious prejudice or discrimination, but rather of the majority simply following existing rules or norms. For those of you who've attended our first workshop, I spoke a lot about the difference between equity and equality, but also the idea that as we build equity into our practices, what we're really trying to do is work towards justice. And justice involves dismantling the colonized systems that we have within all of our institutions. And that requires, in order to dismantle and decolonize our systems, it requires a really deep understanding of systemic bias. That's why we bring that forward today, that part of this work is being responsible, and I think someone said it in one of the mentees, the responsible use of data, the responsible ways of analyzing and interpreting the data that you're collecting goes back to being able to understand and check systemic bias as well as individual bias. So that's why we wanted to bring this forward to you all today, because this is an important part of practice. And when you are going to use data to improve service delivery, to improve practices within your organization, to inform policy development, however you are using your data responsibly has to include this part of that process around checking systemic bias, ensuring that you aren't being influenced by the systemic bias that already exists in our programs and our services. So I have, in the next slide, in order to see how systemic bias is at play, we have to look at the outcomes, which I just talked about. These outcomes are a direct result of social systems that are designed to support some more than others and are rooted in practices and beliefs in accordance with that bias. Like systemic racism, systemic bias is a complex web of individual and internalized biases, interpersonal dynamics, embedded policies, practices, and culture as well as structural systems and norms. That's kind of just what I just said, that it's important for us to recognize that we all have a role in understanding where these systemic biases came from, how we're continuing to perpetuate them, and then taking steps to begin to dismantle them. And a lot of that can be seen and done when we look at the data and what the data says for us to which communities the data directs us, our gaps in our programs or in our access. So when we're looking at systemic bias, you're really trying to look at your organizational practices, your policies, and you're really trying to decide whether or not your data reflects what, or your practices reflect what your data is telling you. So one of the tools that we have and that we try to be aware of is the bias awareness lens. So it just gives you a very simple framework for you to be able to conduct a little bit of a bias check. And you can do this very simply and easily. And I think when people get used to using a bias awareness lens, it becomes second nature. You just inevitably start doing it. So the first thing in your bias awareness lens is to assess your thoughts. Assess what it is that you're thinking about. Then you want to pause. You want to take a minute, because sometimes when we assess our bias, when we assess what we're thinking and where it comes from, that can be challenging. It can be challenging to admit and to be aware that maybe you do have a bias, or maybe that bias is rooted in your own experience, or it's rooted in your history or the history of your identity. So that pause enables you to kind of pick apart your thoughts a little bit. And then we want to act equitably and inclusively. You want to have intention. Our actions need intention behind them, hence why we want to take the pause. And after you act, we want to reflect back. We want to reflect back on whether our actions actually met what we intended them to be. Were they equitable and inclusive? Was my bias, was I able to overcome my bias? Was I able to kind of use my bias positively in a way that enabled me to act equitably? So that reflection piece is really important, because the next time you come upon a situation where you carry bias, because like I said, we all have bias, you're able to then use that reflection piece to come back to number one, assessing your thoughts again. So the second slide is just really kind of going through what I just said, the steps around how do you assess your thoughts, what are some of the questions that you can ask yourselves, and then what are some of the things in the reflection piece that you want to reflect about. So being mindful of your language and your actions, checking your assumptions, cognizant of the privilege dynamics that exist and where you sit in those dynamics. And then what can you do moving forward to prevent the bias from impacting you or others again? So this tool is in the slide deck, and you will have the slide deck. So you can always access this tool, and you can take a copy of it. I encourage you to take a copy and make it your own, and really use the tool. We try to use it with our colleagues. I have leaders that come to me and say, can you help me check my bias? And we go through this process, and I think it's really effective, because when you take action, you're really trying to do something yourself, and you're building your own capacity and your own awareness. And I encourage our leaders in the organization to use it with their teams, to use it with their colleagues, so that we can build this culture that is very aware of our own individual biases, which then leads us to look even more in depth at the systemic biases that exist within the organization. Another tool that is available to folks is the implicit method of bias checking. This is quite popular, and I'm sure if you Google it, if you take a look online, you'll find various different sort of checklists and explanations of how to use the implicit method. So it's quite simple, because it's just things that I think we all kind of naturally do. What it does is it puts it in a format where this leads you on a roadmap towards checking your bias. So introspection, really trying to understand your biases by personally inventorying them. by taking some of these tests. I think, you know, some of you might have been, are familiar with some of the bias tests that exists online. Harvard has a few different tests that they have conducted that you can do online to see where your biases lie in certain areas. So sometimes those tests can tell us certain things or point us in a direction to identify whether we have biases or not. But introspection doesn't have to be a test. It really is just about thinking about where your biases may come from, inventorying some of the things that might be influencing you in certain areas. And then the next part of implicit is the mindfulness piece. Once you understand or recognize and acknowledge the biases you hold, you want to be mindful about that you're more than likely going to give it to them when you're under pressure, give in to them when you're under pressure, or need to make quick decisions. That's where, when we looked at the bias awareness lens, that's where the pause comes back in. Taking a minute to pause, taking a minute to kind of think about what impact your biases are having on your decision making. The next part of implicit is perspective taking. If you think you may be stereotyping people or groups, imagine what it'd feel like from the other's perspective as well. Or if you think you may be stereotyping, think about any kinds of experiences you may have where you have felt stereotyped or stigmatized. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the same way, but what are the feelings that are invoked when you've had those types of experiences? The L is learn to slow down. This is really saying we don't want to jump to conclusions, reminding ourselves about positive experiences we've had or experiences that we've had in the past with different identity groups or friends or colleagues, members of our community. It really is just to kind of slow down and give yourself a minute to think about why the bias that you have exists and what are some of the reasons or examples in your experience that may be leading you to this bias. The I is individualization, reminding ourselves that people have individual characteristics that are separate from others within the group that you might hold a stereotype or a bias about. C is check your messaging. This is going back to, in the bias awareness lens, that being mindful of language, being mindful of what you're saying, being mindful of the messages that you have been partaking in or that you know have had an influence on you. And then the next I is institutionalized fairness. In our workplace, we want to learn to support and embrace diversity. We've gone even further than that in inclusion in our value system. So really trying to ensure that your organization and your environment does have, has a culture that includes equity, that includes inclusion, that includes diversity as part of the fabric of the organization. And then the T is take two. Overcoming unconscious biases takes time. Understand that it's a lifetime process and that deprogramming your biases requires constant mindfulness within your workplace and within the work that we do with clients and community as well. So, like I said, you can Google implicit method for bias checking, and there's better sort of lists and ways of doing this. You can print off a list if you want to be able to kind of have it with you. But I thought I'd introduce it as just a way to begin to look at bias and actually that action of bias checking, which is really important. And sometimes people just need a structure to be able to start doing it. So there are two for you there, the bias awareness lens that we have there, and then this implicit method as well. And then the final sort of resource or tool, and we'll be sure to include this on the Data for Change website as a tool as well, is we have individual bias awareness goal and action planning, as well as for an organization. You can do bias awareness goals and action planning for your organization as well. And this can include, as an individual, it can include things like you want to do more training in a certain area, or we want to be able to reach out to particular communities that we feel that you feel that you may carry bias about because you don't have as much understanding, you haven't had as much experience with a particular community. And so taking a step towards reaching out and, asking for help and support from others and can be one of the goals that you set for yourself in order to check your bias and do that active part of bias awareness. And then as an organization, really having and supporting goals around embedding into practice, training and development when it comes to bias awareness, stereotyping, stigma, equity, diversity, and inclusion as an organization, ensuring that those are requirements for your training within an organization can be a goal that you have as an organization to support people to be able to do, to remove their biases and ensure that they're building equity into their work. So these will also be available to you as well. Okay, we're going to do a quick review of all of the tools that we have been able to, throughout the series of these workshops, that we have introduced in some capacity to you in the different workshops, and how we use them at SHIP so that you can see how our data has influenced our ability to use tools to have a greater impact on our services, our policies, our practices, staff development, the things within our organization that, you know, we've been able to develop internally in order to make improvements. So one of the things, and I think this is available for you on the Data for Change website as well, a clean copy that doesn't have all the SHIP branding on it, I think we have for you there, is the equity impact assessment. So this tool we use on all of our policies and processes in the organization. We have a process as part of our policy review that all policies, when they're reviewed and when they're being created, go to our EDI committee for a review before they go through our entire approval process. At the EDI committee, what we do is we use this tool to ensure that the people most impacted, those that are going to be most impacted by that policy or that process, have been consulted. So we actually do have a conversation and we talk about, you know, what will be the impact on this particular community, on these particular groups of this policy, and have we consulted with them? Have we asked? Have we talked to them before creating a policy that is about them or could impact them? And if we haven't, we make a recommendation that we go through that process first and that we consult with community before we just sort of have this policy go out that may not represent the best interests of a particular group of people. So this tool has been very helpful for us as an active process to check bias, because policies are usually written to try to be very generic. They try to encompass everyone. And we all know that that's really challenging to do unless you ask everyone what the impact of the policy would be. You really can't know for sure. So this is a way for us to be able to check bias while at the same time build equity into our policy and processes. So I encourage you to access the tool on the website and take a look and see if it's something that you can use. It doesn't have to be at the committee level. It can be used by an individual. I use it all the time when I'm writing policies, when I'm creating programs and training. I use it all the time to check my language, to check my, you know, the process that I've gone through, to check accessibility of a training for folks. So I encourage you to use it if, and you're also encouraged if you have questions about it. We're here, Nicole and I are available for you to consult with as well. The other tool that we had introduced in one of the workshops was the SWOT analysis. And we do these SWOT analyses, and I'm sure many of you have probably used SWOT analyses as well, where you look at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The SWOT analysis we use to look at all of our programs when it comes to how we are doing with equity, diversity, and inclusion within the organization. But you can use a SWOT analysis on anything. This is another way for you to check systemic bias. When you look intentionally at your strengths, your weaknesses, what opportunities are there that we may be missing? And then what are the things that are a risk to us as an organization when it comes to how equitable we are, how inclusive we are, and how diversely we represent our community? When you have to actually think about it, it really does provide the staff in the organization an opportunity to check their bias here as well, or check the systemic biases that exist within our programs and within our policies. So we've done this SWOT analysis, and we're going to go into we're going to be doing this again this coming year. We're doing it every 2 years, because we have grown quite a bit as an organization in the past 2 years since the last time that we conducted our SWOT. But we did this with all of our programs, including our board and including all of our professional services programs that aren't direct service, because we wanted to get an overall organizational understanding of where we are with EDI. And it was very, very useful for us to be able to see things from different perspectives. That in and of itself provided a bias check, because it would be very easy for us to say we are a direct service provider, so we only need to do the SWOT with our direct service teams. But what we were able to see when we did it with everyone was that we all have a very different perspective of how the organization looks at equity, and whether or not we're an equitable organization in service, but also are we an equitable organization when it comes to how we treat our staff. So this is it was a very good tool for us to be able to kind of get a big picture analysis and collect data. This is data as well. When you do these types of activities, and when you go through these types of processes, you are essentially collecting data that can be useful and helpful in you being able to implement different strategies across an organization. So I also encourage you to use that tool as well if you are so inclined. It's very simple and straightforward, and I used it with all of our programs, and it was very easy to be able to do that. We also introduced in one of our sessions the prioritization matrix, and we actually did a Menti exercise with the prioritization matrix. And I would recommend, if you are familiar with Menti or another such platform, it's a very easy way to use a prioritization matrix to go through prioritization activities. So if you set it up in Menti, then people are able to remain anonymous, because sometimes that can be a factor. But also people are able to check their own bias individually when you're asking questions. And there's some discomfort when we're trying to prioritize, especially if we're trying to prioritize particular communities. It is a challenge to do that. And not everybody wants to be able to have everybody know their opinion about things like that. So doing it through Menti and prioritizing that way has really been helpful for us to be able to ensure that people are giving their honest, authentic opinions, and the way in which they believe that their voice can be a part of decision making is elevated when we have used this in Menti, so that they can remain anonymous. So I would encourage you to try it, and if we are also available if you want to try it but you're not sure how to set it up. I'm always happy to help organizations go through that process. We've used our prioritization matrix in order to be able to prioritize our community needs assessment action plan. I've used it with our EDI committee. When we conducted the SWOT analysis, we had a huge amount of data from across the whole organization. So we used it to prioritize that information as well in order to create our EDI action plan. So there's a number of different ways that you can use a prioritization matrix to ensure that you're building equity, that your process is equitable, but that you're also then using the data that you get from like a SWOT analysis, that you are using this tool to ensure that you try to remove bias as much as possible from the prioritization process. I think this is also available for folks as well. And it's here in the slides as well, just an explanation of what each of the quadrants means when you set up a prioritization matrix. And that's something that you can use to explain to folks if you're using it with a team, let's say, or if you're using it with your leadership team. That explanation of what each of the quadrants means when they choose their priorities is really important for them. So you can use this slide if you want to be able to make those explanations. And then we also talked a little bit about our community needs assessment that we conducted. So we have conducted a community needs assessment. From that community needs assessment, we developed an action plan and a strategy that set some priorities. So community demographic data assessment, we used available statistical data about the communities that we serve. So across Peel Region, Dufferin County, West Toronto, and Kitchener. We used available Stats Canada data, and then we looked at our own internal client demographic data. So our MHA PDS data that we also talked about in one of these workshops. We were able to use that full data set to have a greater understanding of our entire community and whether or not our data that we collect at SHIP makes sense when we reflect on statistical data. So there's many ways in which we were able to kind of understand and come together to analyze that data from different perspectives. So we didn't just have one group analyzing the data or looking at the data. We used multiple different groups to take a look at our data and to see what the data told them and what the data tells them. So EDI, our EDI committee, which, like I said, has client and family representation on that committee, as well as diverse representation from across the entire organization and across all identity groups. We looked at that data and we were able to give very different perspectives about what the data tells us than potentially our leadership team alone would have been able to do. So that's another important way in which you can check bias and you can ensure that you're building equity into how you use data. Part of the process of a community needs assessment was engaging with community. And so we engaged with partners, staff, and clients and families from our community around service needs, strengths, and challenges. So we did do somewhat of a SWOT analysis with those various groups through a focus group method. And then what we were able to see is emerging sectoral trends. We identified current and emerging trends within the sectors that may impact our service provision. So we're doing a comparative analysis with similar providers, which is another way to check our systemic biases that we have about our own organization and the way in which we provide service. So kind of doing that comparison with similar providers of yours, like to whatever sector you're in, gives you a bit of a frame of reference. Not that you are comparing who's better or not, we really were just comparing what the data told us were areas that we could potentially should potentially be looking at. So a community needs assessment is another tool that you can use to be able to kind of have a bigger picture understanding of what the data that you're collecting and socio-demographic data of your clients is actually telling you about the community and what are the areas in which you can that you potentially aren't serving that you should be, and what are the gap areas that you should be looking at potentially programming for. So that's how we've been able to use this community needs assessment, is to develop an action plan to reach the communities that we are not reaching, to look at our housing provision and build equity into housing, and then to look at our service provision and where there are gaps. And then we used our health equity assessment to try to develop strategies to fill those gaps. And I just talked about this. And this is our health equity assessment that we we talked about this at our last workshop. The health equity impact assessment is our main tool that we use to build health equity into all of our programs and service delivery, to be able to identify inequities that exist within our services and then develop plans and actions to eliminate or reduce those inequities as much as we possibly can. So this is another way in which we can use data to reduce systemic bias that we have and systemic inequities that exist within our organization. So this is the health equity impact assessment is collecting information and data in a way that is equitable, but also being able to use that data to make improvements to back to the community. And we share these improvements with community and clients because the strategies that we employ are actual changes to the way in which we deliver service. So that's another tool that is available to you as well, I believe, on the website. And we talked in the last workshop about how we use the HIA. So the assessment leads us to develop health equity action plans. And I think I have this available for you on the website as well as a template. So in our action plans, what we're looking at as a health service provider, we're looking at the social determinants of health, which is the majority of the data that we collect is about the social determinants of health. And we're looking at unintended impacts, developing a plan to reduce those unintended negative impacts, improve the unintended positive impacts, and then developing a mitigation plan for those impacts and a monitoring plan over the course of time. We also include in our health equity action plans outcome measures. How are we going to evaluate whether or not what we are doing is effective, whether or not it's working, whether or not it's adaptive and sustainable. So we include all of those items in our action plans for all of our programs. And as an organization, we have an organizational health equity action plan as well. So this process that we go through when we collect data has really driven some of these action plans that we have that have also driven change. So when we talk about data for equity and data for change, we're talking about how we use data to facilitate impact within your organization and your service delivery. And some of these tools that we have showcased along the way on these workshops are ways in which we at SHIP have been able to try to do that and responsibly use our data to be able to improve the organization, improve our service, and improve how we are able to communicate with community members and with our community of clients and staff. This final one is our health equity charter. This is posted at all of our locations. Sorry, my throat is dry. This is posted at all of our locations to ensure that everyone entering our spaces recognizes that we value and prioritize health equity and that we value and prioritize people. I think it's important that you ensure that people are welcome in your spaces and that understand that that we will not tolerate inequity, and that's important for you to highlight and ensure that people know about it. So our health equity charter is one of the ways in which we're able to do that. And the charter was developed collaboratively with community partners and then adapted over time and updated by our EDI committee, over the years. So this is another way where you get those inclusive voices where people can have their voices, and usually it's folks that usually don't have that opportunity to do this work and to participate in something like this. You provide that space when you develop these types of things collaboratively. And that's what we did at SHIP. Even though the charter was developed by a community collaboration, when we knew it was time for us to update this charter, we brought it to our EDI committee, we brought it to clients, we brought it to the people of the organization most impacted to be able to make the updates. So that's another way in which you can begin that process of decolonization and building equity, is by ensuring that those voices that are usually not at the table or not allowed at the table are prioritized when we're doing these sort of major systemic changes to your organization. And then we also talked about in one of the earlier workshops, our data equity training program. This program is one of the reasons why we've been able to do so much of the work that we're able to do. The idea that data equity and our MHA PDS training is required of all staff is really important. That's how we've been able to build a culture of data equity within the organization. People begin to understand, people begin to question, and when they do the training, they really look at our data differently. They look at the idea that they're working with people who have unique needs, and it really does change perspective. It has done that for us at SHIP. It has given us an opportunity to even expand upon some of these things that, you know, we've already been doing. We've always done health equity. We've always done the HIA. But really, the data equity program has given us a broader base of information about the communities that we serve. And then we've expanded that to be about the staff that we also serve as an organization who are doing the work. So data equity is really important. Having a training program, I think, is really important. The assumption that people just understand data and understand the complexities of data or the inequities that exist within data, it's a misnomer. People really just don't necessarily understand it just because they do it. It really requires thought. And, you know, those discussions that we have about the difference between asking questions on a checklist, which it can easily become when you're collecting sociodemographic data, and making an offer, it's important for us to have those conversations with folks, because there is a difference between asking questions just on a checklist and making an offer of space for people to tell us about their authentic selves. So our program has really been able to do that in the organization, and that's made a big difference for us. I'm going to hand it over to Nicole to give you our takeaways from today.
Thank you, Shireen. Okay, so those tools that we really wanted to give an overall highlight again, just because we spoke about them, some of them at the very beginning, and we'll make sure that they are uploaded to the Data for Change website, just so that you could reflect back to it, and then also how you can bring it forward to your own organizations and really reflect and align it to your key performance indicators in your strategic plan. It'll really provide, like I said, a foundation and vision in how we all can commit to improving and enhancing the experience of our community and staff. So we're going to bring it all together with our key takeaways so social justice can support us in aligning better to our communities. Trauma-informed practice will sorry, I have the wrong note there. I'm going to read off the slide here. Sorry about that. So our takeaways today are that we need to shift the narrative on data reporting, and having awareness to implicit and systemic biases is crucial to the change that we're making. Equity data highlights health disparities and social injustice, and it showcases the need for action through telling the story. Commitment to the equity use of data overall ensures that Data for Change will be foundational and it is mindful. And equity data is not about numbers, it's about people and telling the story. So we have some time now for any questions or comments from folks in the audience. I don't know if anything was sent directly to Find Help as well.
Nope, we have no comments on our end either. It's just giving some time there. So if you wanted to connect with us directly, here's our contact information for both Shireen and I. And if you have a question or wanted to kind of look forward to some of the information that we provided and wanted to chat further, we have information, our contact information here.
and wanted to take this opportunity to thank you, merci and miigwech everyone, for your time and openness to learn about equity data and the use of data, and for joining in the series delivered by SHIP. We appreciate you all, and we look forward to seeing you at the final community of practice in December, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Well done, well done.
Thank you. We will try, I think what we can do, Kosal, because I'm not sure if all of the resources or the templates that we talked about, if we've given all of them to you all, so
Okay.
I'll take a look at the website and see which ones are there, and whichever ones are not, we'll send to you. Should we send
Okay.
them to you?
Just send it to myself and Keishawn, and
Okay,
then work with our IT team and upload it. But I have to hop off to another meeting, but
yes,
good
me too.
guys. And we'll continue to finish this out with the bang.
Okay,
Thank you so much.
awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Take
Bye.
care. Bye.